Howdy YouTube, Patrick from Twin Quest here, and today I want to talk a little bit about Kurt Albert. Now Kurt was the father of the redpoint, and what a redpoint is when you're able to complete a route that you've been working on without having to rest on your protective gear. This is a style of climbing known as free climbing, which has been practiced since the early 20th century. This is different than aid climbing, a style of climbing where someone uses artificial hands and feet to get past parts of the wall that are impassable via other methods. Now this is still practiced in big wall climbing today, but back then it was commonly employed on parts of the wall where it was not necessary. And Kurt was one of the first people to really advocate minimal impact on the rock. And so what he started to do at the age of 21 was go to the bottom of some of these aid routes and draw a red circle, and if he was able to complete the route without using any of the aid, he would fill that in with paint, and this is where the term red pointing originally comes from. So, as a boy, there are stories of Kurt climbing outside the 8th story window of his apartment building to get to his best friend's house, proving that he's been a daring climber at least as long as he's been climbing. Now he started climbing at the age of 14 in 1968, but actually worked as a math and physics teacher up until 1986, when he began his professional climbing career. And for the first 8 years of his climbing career, he would do only aid climbs. However, sometimes the pitons were up to 5 meters apart, and he would use them if he got to them, but it was entirely free climbing in between them. And it wasn't until 1973, at the age of 18, when he visited Elbsandstein, where they were doing routes up to 510s in the 1920s, free routes. And I believe this really lit up a passion in him, because 2 years later, he would start doing his red point routes, and he would put up 20 first ascents in the first weekend. However, one thing I think is kind of interesting about this is that they weren't technically red point routes, since he did not place the gear himself. He attached the rope to the pitons that were there in case he fell, and so this is technically a pink point, not a red point, even though this is where the term red pointing comes from. And now in 1975, his first red point route would be the Adolf-Rott-Ged in Frankenjura, and this was a 10C. He did this when he was 21 years old. And then in 76, he would free the Gelbe Wand at the Matterhornwand in Frankenjura, and this would be Germany's first UIAA grade of 7, which is an 11A in the Yosemite Decimal System grading. And UIAA is what's now known as the IFFC, for anyone who's wondering. And then in 77, he would make a first ascent of Devil's Crack, which he would come back in 79 to free solo. Now, this is a 10D in Frankenjura, and on it he took one of my favorite climbing pictures of all time, where he's free soloing it in lederhosen with a beer in his hand. I'm going to put that on the screen right here. Okay, and then in 1980 he would make a first ascent of Rubberneck, a 12C in Frankenjura, and in 81, together with his best friend and longtime climbing partner Wolfgang Güllich, would put up a first ascent of a UIAA-grade 8- or 12A, 250 meter long, called Locker von Hocker. And then also a first ascent of Germany's first UIAA grade of 9-, which is a 12D. Then in 82, he would put up a first ascent of Magnet, a 12D, in Frankenjura. And in 84, he would be awarded with the Silbernes Lorbverblatt, the highest commendation for sports achievement in Germany. And then 2 years later, he would begin his professional climbing career. And I believe getting a highest sports accommodation in your country would really motivate you to do that as a profession. Okay, I feel it's honestly impossible to discuss the climbing career of Kurt Albert without also talking a little bit about Wolfgang Güllich. So, Güllich started climbing in 1977 at the age of 16, before he moved to Frankenjura in 1981 at the age of 20. Now, in Frankenjura, Güllich and Kurt would share an apartment together for 11 years, in which they would train in the cellar with some of the best climbers in the world. Now, here I have a video of Jerry Moffat, a prolific climber who put up some hard bouldering routes in Joshua Tree by my house, discussing the kinds of climbing the kinds of training they would do in that cellar.
Interesting to hear, because when you read the training book of Wolfgang, Sportklettern heute, it's mainly just pull-ups. That's what I did when I was a teenager.
Yes.
I read this book and I had my door jam and
Yes.
pull-ups, but it was, I think,
Well, I
not
know,
so effective.
No, well, I know from Wolfgang, because in the cellar in Oberschellenbach there was a dip bar, and there was the door jamb, and the door jamb was metal and quite a good edge. And I know that Kurt and Wolfgang went down there back in the early 80s, and both of them just, well, the more pull-ups we do, the better we're going to get. So we're just going to do endless pull-ups. And they went down and they did endless pull-ups. That's all they did. Pull-ups, 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 pull-ups and hangs, pull-ups and hangs, pull-ups and hangs, and dips. And that was it. But they never did, as far as I was aware, they didn't really do anything else.
Okay, there you have it. The training wasn't super complicated, mostly bodyweight exercises, dips, pull-ups, and hangs. However, there was a sense of camaraderie and a sense of fun in their training, as you'll see in a video I put on the screen now, that I believe really motivated some of these difficult first ascents. It was described by Jerry Moffat that Albert was completely reliable. He said, if you were in a jam, he's the man you'd want there. And so in 1986, Albert would become a professional climber, and he would make a solo ascent of Fight Gravity at 12C in Frankenjura. The same year, Güllich, after recovering from breaking his back, would make a solo ascent of Separate Reality, an 11D in Yosemite, and take on that route one of my favorite climbing pictures of all time. And I'll throw that picture on the screen now. Although if you're into vintage climbing photography, you've probably already seen it. It's very famous. In 87, he would make a first free ascent of several routes in the Dolomites, in 12As and 12Ds. In 88, Kurt would solo Courage-Foyant, a 12B in France. In 89, he would make a first ascent of the Eternal Flame, and in 90, a first ascent of Riders of the Storm, a 13A in Patagonia, a climbing area in Argentina which he helped to pioneer the climbing in. Now in 1992, Wolfgang Güllich would die, and this has a lasting effect on Albert. Given the fact that Wolfgang Güllich was credited with putting first ascents in several of the climbing grades, I believe we would have even seen Albert climbing higher than his lifetime grade of 13B if Güllich had not died. So in 93, the year after Güllich dies, he puts up a first ascent of Stairway to Heaven, a 13A in Venezuela, and in 94, first ascent of Moby Dick, a 13B in Greenland, which would be his lifetime high grade. In 95, he'd make a first ascent of Royal Flush, a 13A in Patagonia, and a first ascent of Fitzcarraldo, a 12C in Canada. In 96, he would make a first ascent of Gelbe Wand, a 13A, and in 97, a first ascent of a 12C, in 98, first ascent of a 13A, and all of this leads up to 2010, where he has an unfortunate accident in Via Ferrata, Germany, where he wasn't even climbing, he was taking pictures on a system of ladders going up a cliff and leading a group, and he had a fatal accident. No one knows why he fell, but after falling 18 meters, he died of his injuries 2 days later in the hospital. This was at the age of 56. However, he was putting up some very difficult first ascents well into his 50s. In 2006, 2008, and 2009, He put up several first ascents in Venezuela from 13A, 13B, and 12A. And so he was really just climbing very difficult routes his whole life. He's a very interesting and inspiring climber, so I decided to make a video on him, considering that there doesn't seem to be very much information out there about him. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed. If you liked the video, please like it so that I know you liked it. Comment if you have any comments you want me to hear about. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and if you share the video, that'd be very helpful for me. Thank you very much. I'll leave information about all of these climbs in the description down below if you want to read more about them.